Hello everybody, this is Mark Hutten with myaspergerschild.com, and received an email from a teacher who knows for a fact that she will be having a student with high functioning autism in her class this upcoming school year, and she's wanting to know if I can give her some quick tips on things that she has to know in order to be the best teacher that she can. So we're going to look at some ideas specifically for teachers who will be having a student with high functioning autism in their class this coming school year, which, as many of you know, was formerly called Asperger syndrome. So even though we have two different names, the traits and the way that parents and teachers need to deal with the symptoms are basically the same. I think it would be advisable here at the beginning, before we get into some actual techniques to use as far as teaching a child with HFA, high functioning autism, it might be beneficial to talk a little bit about the fact that they demonstrate a significant discrepancy between academic achievement and intellectual abilities. And that is manifest usually in the areas of written expression, spelling, reading skills, reading comprehension, oral expression, mathematics reasoning, mathematical calculation, and listening comprehension. It might also be beneficial, before we look at some strategies to help teach this child, to look at some of the traits that the HFA child has. And these traits are usually not isolated ones, rather they appear in varying degrees and amounts. So your student with high functioning autism may find it difficult to stay on task for extended periods of time. He may have a low tolerance level. He may have a high frustration level. A poor concept of time, poor self-esteem is also very common. It's very likely that the HFA student will have coordination problems with both large and small muscle groups, which is important information given that this child is going to be mixed in with typical children on the playground. He or she may also have difficulty in following complicated oral directions. The HFA child is also fairly inflexible in thought. He may have poor auditory memory, poor handwriting skills, may have difficulty in working with others in small or large group settings. He's also relatively spontaneous in expression, and he or she may have difficulty controlling emotions. And when that becomes a worst case scenario, we call those meltdowns. It would be important for you and the other staff members to be well trained in dealing with HFA students, because you're going to be getting more and more of those students as time goes by. So it's best to get some training, or at least be thinking about getting some training specifically for this population. So having said all that, consider the following strategies, and we're just going to barely scratch the surface here, not to promote an ebook, but if you want a full program on how to teach children with high functioning autism, go to myaspergerschild.com and look for the link that says Teaching Students with Asperger's and HFA, and I'll go into much greater detail there. Having said that, HFA students do best when the daily program remains consistent with clear expectations. Also, children with HFA benefit from a highly structured program. In other words, one in which the sequence of activities and procedures is consistent and stable. Another thing that is worth mentioning is HFA children need lots of special praise. And I'm sure you already do that with your other students. But you want to be very specific in your praise. So instead of just saying, well, you did well, or I like your work, provide some specific praising comments that link the activity directly to the recognition. For example, I was really impressed with the way you organized your rock collection. So definitely praise, but be very specific in your praise. Also, students with HFA have difficulty learning abstract terms and concepts. So whenever it's possible, and I know teachers are busy, but whenever possible, provide this student with concrete objects and events. For example, items that they can see, touch, hear, and smell, and so on. Establishing and following a visual schedule is also very important, because it eliminates the unexpected, and it also assists the HFA child in anticipating and preparing for transitions. These schedules should be visual and kept in the same location at all times. Another important thing to do is to discuss appropriate classroom behavior at frequent intervals. Some teachers have the "this is how we behave in my classroom" speech at the beginning of the school year, and they have it one time. But it's going to be important with your HFA student to have that the classroom rules conversation, have that conversation with the HFA student several times. And don't expect this student to remember in May all the classroom rules that were expected in September. So provide a refresher course on the expected behavior throughout the year. Also, encourage cooperative learning activities when possible. You can invite children of varying abilities to work together on a specific project or toward a common goal. And you can create a classroom environment in which a true community of learners is facilitated. So even though the HFA student doesn't shine, particularly in groups, rather he does much better on his own, you do want to encourage cooperative learning activities when possible. And on that note, you want to get the HFA student involved in activities with his peers, particularly those typical students who avoid engaging in bullying behavior and who serve as good role models. So it's important that kids on the spectrum have opportunities to interact with other kids who can provide appropriate behavioral guidelines through their actions. Another important point would be to give immediate feedback to the HFA student. These students need to see quickly the relationship between what was taught and what was learned. Okay? Also, you want to make activities very concise and short whenever possible, because long drawn-out projects are particularly frustrating for the HFA student, especially if she's not interested in the subject. Now, also know that students with HFA tend to have just one or two special interests, so you'll want to take advantage of that in the classroom. For example, if your student takes an interest in trains, then he or she should have the opportunity to read about trains, write about trains, do math problems about trains, and so on. It's also important to provide this student with frequent progress checks. You want to let him know how well he's progressing toward an individual or class goal. And probably the last important thing, although there's many things that need to be considered, would be that the visual and auditory stimulation in the classroom should really be taken into consideration. Most children with HFA are very sensitive to auditory input, and they really have a more difficult time processing auditory stimulation. So whenever possible, it would be best if their workstations could be placed away from excessive auditory stimulation and away from unnecessary movement as well. So those are some ideas to consider up front. Again, that's just kind of a snapshot of some of the things you need to consider. If you will go to myaspergerschild.com, you will see a search bar at the very top of the page. And if you want some more tips, just type in there teaching students. And you should get a bunch of information, both for the HFA student and the Asperger student. And by the way, anything that will work with an Asperger student will work with an HFA student as well. So if you have any other questions, feel free to email me. My email is mbhutton. That's mbhutton@gmail.com. And I'll be glad to provide any additional information for you teachers out there who are going the extra mile and wanting to make sure that you're going to do a good job with your HFA students this year. Thank you. Good luck. God bless. This is Mark Hutten. We'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.